Around this time of year, we are reminded of a lot of stories, allegories, and archetypes. You might catch a Christmas pageant, or hear the little drummer boy on the radio. You might light a menorah. You might watch Star Wars with your family, or you might just break out the N64 while you're home from college. And in any case, you are plugged into a mythos. In recent months, I've criticized some works for prioritizing story exclusively when their platforms allow for so many user-defined elements, and I stand by that wholeheartedly, but that doesn't mean I don't see the value in storytelling, even if I prefer that it be complemented by the user's direction when possible. In all of its forms, linear or malleable, concrete or abstract, storytelling plays a much bigger part in our lives than most of us realize. We all have those stories we revisit on at least an annual basis. Many of us make somewhat of a practice out of it, either casually or formally, because, however fictional or historically legitimate, these stories mean a lot to us, often for reasons we can't explain. We don't always see it for what it is, but stories are, and have always been, the channels by which our values as a society are seeded. Every work of literature worth reading, every fable worth repeating, every film or game worth passing on to the next generation embeds some volume of teachings to be adopted and passed on. The lesson might be as simple as the virtue of persistence, or as complex as the enigma that is epistemology. But in any case, allegory is used to scaffold our ways through those gray territories that elude the black and white metrics of the sciences. One of the fundamental ways for accomplishing this is the use of archetypes, like Gilgamesh, Perseus, and Beowulf, characters that model roles that epitomize traits, wit, strength, malice, power, beauty, vigilance. From these stories, we, both as individuals and as a citizenry, derive how we see the world around us and how we recognize our own roles within it. Therefore, the practice of storytelling has been critical for the harmonious function of every civilization since the Epic of Gilgamesh was spread throughout Mesopotamia. Of course, some of these stories are religious, but there's no reason they have to be. Something as secular as The Wizard of Oz can model the importance of combining our skills to compensate for our weaknesses and become more than the sum of our parts. The archetypes here are obvious. Each character represents a quality or avoidance thereof, depending on the point in the narrative. Courage, intelligence, passion, or you might call it heart. Although sometimes the message is a bit less obvious. Let's go back further.
In light of the mighty warriors turned to stone by the gaze of the Medusa, Perseus rises to the challenge with a new approach.
He sidesteps her deadly gaze by viewing it only through the reflective surface of his shield, allowing him to slay her without looking into her eyes, because
having the right knowledge and tools is often more important than your raw might.
You might reduce this to brain is greater than brawn, but only with some unpacking. You wouldn't call this a fact. You can't squarely put a metric to it. It's not plain to see. Rather, it's a truth that must be realized through experience, either firsthand or passed on through the ages, perhaps through fiction. And shades of Perseus can be seen throughout its innumerable successors. This brings me to The Legend of Zelda, which, apart from continuing the aforementioned tradition, is perhaps the most quintessential example of archetypes of our generation. The Triforce is explicitly defined as the sacred balance of courage, wisdom, and power, traits that are embodied by what else? Archetypes. Zelda, the regal princess whose wisdom guides the modest but courageous Link to defeat Ganon, whose unchecked power would allow him to corrupt the land of Hyrule and potentially the world. There's so much truth to unpack there, on both the micro and macro scale, and its relevance goes far beyond the fiction. When power is not balanced by the wisdom to guide it and the courage to stand up against it, atrocity ensues. And on the contrary, a plethora of wisdom and courage without power fails to wield progress. On the micro level, the Triforce can be seen as a model for the self. A man with power and courage but no wisdom is prone to corruption. A man with courage and wisdom but no power will be knowingly, helplessly victimized by the corrupted. A man with power and wisdom but no courage will stand by as corruption seizes the day. To a remarkable degree, this model parallels other self-models. Plato's Chariot, wherein reason must supersede appetite and passion, as well as Freud's id, ego and superego, which for broad strokes purposes are your desires for evil, balance, and good, respectively. I suspect these parallels are not intentional. Rather, these are three separate thinkers discovering and charting the same territory of truth. They're not copycats, they're reaching the same conclusion because it is universally true. It persists through the ages, and even if you shredded all the texts and copies that embody it, one day, in another time, these truths would eventually re-emerge from some expression of human existence. Legend of Zelda is just the latest expression of this epiphany to captivate humanity by the millions. The tale of Link, the forest boy who defies the odds and conquers the corruptive Ganon, can also be seen as yet another telling of David and Goliath. But what seals The Legend of Zelda as a moment of creative history is that for the first time, the audience is poised to not just audit this struggle, but experience it. Amidst the entertainment value, the player will experience discouragement, self-doubt, frustration, and fatigue. This is by design. Through its various trials, the player consumes yet another study of universal truth that patience, perception, and practice wield accomplishment. The way I see it, this exemplifies the utility of fiction. It is a crafted experience that encrypts a plethora of teachings, not only by narrative means, but by trials that exert the player's problem-solving skills. And what better feat can a work of art accomplish than to make its viewer a sharper, wiser, and better person? I'd go so far as to wager that a positive correlation could be found between Zelda playership and standardized test scores, or even raw ambition if only we could measure it. Because of the advent of mass production and the 20th century's world population explosion, it's now true that more humans have experienced some version of The Legend of Zelda in its historically infantile age than even lived in Mesopotamia, the civilization from which the earliest allegories emerged. The millennials and zoomers by the tens of millions are experiencing Zelda's trials and absorbing its teachings, if only as a byproduct of entertainment. It stands to reason that this growing body of work may be remembered and revered with a similar or perhaps even greater capacity than many scholarly classics in the centuries to come. As a side note, despite such well-founded reverence for games like Zelda, there remains a relentless stigma on the gaming medium.
Are they going to become violent just by playing Grand Auto Theft and Halo and these games?
Have you ever played Mass Effect?
No.
Video games to me are murder simulators is what they are.
They don't show women as being valued for anything other than their sexuality. And it's a man in this game deciding how many women he wants to be with.
All right, let's get
A form of media.
Darlin, I gotta go with the research. And the research said boys that play video games cannot tell the difference between what they're seeing in a video game and the real world.
What do you think a young boy's gonna do? I want to play my dad's video game while he's not here. And I think that's dangerous. We really have to watch.
There's all kinds of bad stuff coming through the internet, through video games.
Something I've personally observed hundreds of times. Starting in school and well into adulthood, so many people are actual closet gamers, afraid to be judged by their colleagues or maybe even their family for spending their time mythonautically, wasting time and rotting their brains, despite the obvious cognitive value in these games that so many turn a blind eye to. The same people who are happy to stare at pages of black text for their stories somehow draw the line at polygons and pixels. And I don't mean apathetically, by the way, but frankly judgmentally. I'm not saying they should all become gamers, but it would be great if we could live and let live a bit more, and not pass judgment on someone for appreciating something as obviously great as Zelda. This is why some fans find themselves explaining it away in terms like, it's so good it's almost like a movie, as if games' ultimate potential would be to transcend into the more accepted form of cinema. That's a topic I explored in another video, the RPG Identity Crisis, wherein I critique many games' shared trajectory towards cinematic form. Consider giving that one a watch. But for now, one last thought. Had the Legend of Zelda mythos emerged among the nebula of ancient history, it might have inspired an authentic religion. Obviously, it had a millennia-wide canon of works to build off of, but at any rate, Zelda's literary value when unpacked is huge. It makes me wonder, what if the older myths emerged today? Would their lack of historical mystique render them a waste of time in the eyes of modern society? Would many of us scoff at the same stories that we now religiously observe? Would we be so blind to their allegorical worth if they were to manifest in the wrong medium? We'll never know, but it's food for thought anyway. If you enjoyed this content, consider checking out my other videos. I talk a lot about Western RPGs like Fallout, Elder Scrolls, and The Outer Worlds. This is a brand new channel, by the way, so your like or sub would go a long way, and I hope to see you next time.